Hey, so the other day when I wasn't worrying about a car bomb being found in Times Square, they kept saying it was only a crude car bomb, as if that made a difference. Oh, it's only a crude car bomb. Why didn't you say so? Anyway, the other day when I wasn't worrying about that, I watched a video entitled A Jesus Rant that appears on the Pursuit blog channel here on YouTube. A link to the video appears in the description box below. This is a response. The Pursuit blog spends much of this video trying to establish that Jesus not only existed, but must have been God because...
My question is, why would you formulate a religion around somebody who just was a really good teacher and never claimed to be anything but?
The world's 350 million Buddhists might have an answer to that question. Religions get started for lots of reasons. The mere fact that one arose around Jesus does not demonstrate that he was divine or even that he claimed to be.
I'm kind of scratching my head wondering if the Bible's not based on some amount of truth about Jesus, then why in the world would people go out and make a religion that would turn out to be the most influential religion in the world?
Credit for Christianity's becoming the influential religion that it became primarily and largely goes to the Roman Empire. As Charles Freeman notes in his book A.D. 381, Heretics, Pagans, and the Dawn of the Monotheistic State, prior to the merger and acquisition of Christianity by the Roman Empire, quote, the early Christian communities had been isolated and largely confined to the Greek-speaking cities of the empire. The movement manifested itself in a surprising variety of ways as Christian beliefs interacted with those of other cults. Beginning with Constantine, Imperial Rome brought Christianity out of the shadows and gave it its first ecumenical councils, in which, under the watchful eyes of the emperor, Christian doctrines were defined, and those unwilling to go along with the newly emerging orthodoxy were marginalized and ostracized. Imperial patronage brought Christianity safety, wealth, property, and power, and Christianity's hierarchy began to mirror imperial governmental structures. Eventually, imperial legislation imposed Christian doctrine, and imperial muscle enforced it and suppressed opposition. This Christianity, a distant cousin of the one that arose in first century Palestine, emerged to take its place among the world's most influential religions. None of this tells us anything about whether Jesus was divine.
And if you're going to make up a religion, why would you make up a religion that says die to yourself daily, take up your cross and follow Jesus? Don't have sex before marriage. Celibacy is not something to be frowned upon. Help other people with your money and your resources and rejoice in suffering. I'm thinking that if I'm going to come up with a religion, it's going to say eat, drink, and be merry.
Christian asceticism is, in the main, a product of early Christian apocalyptic and eschatological beliefs. In other words, the early Christians were, as 1 Thessalonians 1:10 says, quote, waiting for God's Son from heaven, and they believed he'd be arriving at any minute. And so, for example, in 1 Corinthians 7, in the context of the time having been shortened, and this world in its present form passing away, the Apostle Paul admonishes the Corinthian Christians to remain as free as they can from the things and cares of life in order to practice, quote, undistracted devotion to the Lord. Stay unmarried if you can. If you're a slave, don't worry about it, and so on. And, of course, asceticism and religious calls to personal sacrifice are not unique to Christianity. None of this provides any support for the claim that Jesus was divine. He didn't come back.
But what a lot of people miss out on is the fact that the epistles being written predominantly by Peter, Paul, and John, were written not too much longer after the death of Jesus, and those people were eyewitnesses, and we do know who they were. And all the epistles collaborate well with the gospel accounts.
Well, not really. First, what exactly was Paul an eyewitness to? And does it comport with the Gospels? According to his own testimony in the first chapter of Galatians, Paul had a revelation of Jesus Christ, specifically an internal revelation. Quote, God was pleased to reveal his Son in me. In 1 Corinthians 15, where, contrary to what he was doing in Galatians, Paul is trying to align himself with earlier followers of Jesus. He claims to have seen a vision of the post-mortem Jesus, whom he calls a life-giving spirit. And last of all, Jesus appeared to me also. He claims that his vision of the post-mortem Jesus was the same as what the apostles and others saw. Does that comport with the Gospels? No. See, for example, Luke 24:39, which has the post-mortem Jesus assuring his apostles that they weren't seeing some vision of a spirit. See my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Touch and see, because a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see I have. By contrast, Acts has Paul seeing a blindingly bright light and hearing a voice that identifies itself as Jesus. Is that what the Gospels have the apostles seeing? No. They see a post-mortem Jesus in the same body that was put to death, in a body that continues to bear the scars of crucifixion and admits of physical inspection. By contrast, Paul says what comes from the resurrection is not the same body that is buried at death. None of this seems like an example of
all the epistles collaborate well with the gospel accounts.
Quite the opposite, actually. Second, how about Peter? What exactly was he an eyewitness to? Well, the Peter of 1 Peter tells us that Jesus was, quote, put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit. But the Peter of the Gospels sees a post-mortem Jesus who insists he's not a spirit, but flesh and bone, and who does several things to prove it. The Peter of Acts even, quote, ate and drank with Jesus after he arose from the dead. This isn't exactly harmonious stuff. Third, what about John? What exactly was he an eyewitness to? The John of 1 John tells his readers, quote, Beloved, now we are the children of God, and it has not appeared as yet what we shall be. We know that when Jesus appears, we shall be like him, because we shall see him just as he is. If this is the John of the Gospels, what's he talking about? Jesus appeared to the John of the Gospels. John saw him as he was. Is this the John of Revelation who saw a post-mortem Jesus with a shiny face, white head and white wool-like hair, eyes like flames of fire, and a voice like the sound of many waters? Which one is it? What's he like hasn't appeared yet? John saw what he was like after the resurrection, or John saw what he's like in an apocalyptic vision? They can't all be true. This is not.
All the epistles collaborate well with the gospel accounts.
So, I must say to the Pursuit blog, with all due respect, that this jumble doesn't look the least bit harmonious to me, and I don't see how any of it militates in favor of the claim that Jesus was divine, or that any of it is logical. An outsider would not be impressed by the Bible as a harmonious, inerrant collection of texts because, well, as we've seen, it's not. The claim that the Bible is a harmonious, inerrant collection of texts is an article of faith. It's not based on empirically observable harmony and inerrancy. Rather, it's based on an evidence-free, indeed evidence-averse, faith-driven need to make the Bible into what it should be if it actually were the written word of an omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent sovereign of the universe. There is no evidence of divinity here, Jesus's or anyone else's. Thanks a lot.